The challenge that most of these companies, I'll venture to almost say any of these companies with a large user base are experiencing is, particularly as you have a sales organization, who should you talk to and why? And why is that a good use of your time? And why, and more importantly, why is that a good use and a value add that you can go and drive with this potential prospect within an account? And I think that that has been, as we've seen kind of the proliferation of tech, the personalization, the how do you get more specificity around why someone should be engaging with you, for what reason, and how you're going to help is an ever-going challenge. And I think many of us have experienced in our email inboxes that there can be a lack of personalization that falls pretty flat along the way. The greater the scale on the user base, the greater the insights and the greater the systems that are going to be required to help pinpoint who you should reach out to and why. What's that compelling story?
One of the biggest challenges that we had with this back when I was at Yammer more than a decade ago was the question of when you should reach out to someone who has not come through the product first. Because none of these, Dropbox might be the exception where probably everyone or the vast majority of the market has signed up for a Dropbox account at some point, even just for their personal stuff. But for many folks, like Loom still is new in the market. There are a lot of people who haven't used it. When do you go and do like a top-down outbound sales motion instead of looking at your list of the people who came up through the product?
This is where you really have to be structured in capturing your learnings from early customer conversations, and specifically around, we'll take a Loom or a Dropbox or a Quip. I basically built a career on horizontal productivity tools that we use in a myriad of ways. And while that's amazing because there are so many different ways that you can drive value for an organization, it can become challenging in terms of the pattern matching, particularly in the early days, because you're going to get a bunch of different use cases, a bunch of different organizations that are leveraging your technology. And it warrants like, how do you focus? Because if you say that you're everything to everyone, are you anything would be a framing in question.
One thing that stands out about that is these horizontal products all have big markets. And I'm curious how much that's required. There are exceptions, of course, like Figma is a really good example of a market that is focused on a very particular user type, designers primarily, and then secondarily developers. But they've made a very big business in a product-led way with a particular target. But I think a lot of the product-led businesses that I can think of are horizontal in part because the markets are just so massive. And I'm curious, if you think this problem can even be avoided, because if having a really, really big market is a critical piece of being a successful product-led company, then, everyone who builds around a product-led motion is going to end up with this same kind of challenge of, hey, who is our audience really? What do we market and to whom?
Yep. And that is, I don't think it's a challenge that can just suddenly be, magic wanded to go away. I have found that there becomes an inflection point, particularly as you start bolstering your sales organization and your marketing efforts, where you want to be more defined in guiding people towards example use cases, personas that you want to sell to. How are you going to be more targeted? And really, ultimately, that's a narrowing of what are going to be the set of bets that we make, that these 2 to 3 personas are the right starting place, or we're going to go deep and ideally prove out a bunch of success, and then begin layering on as we have more and more data to support that is a repeatable motion. So in the very early innings, you're going to have a lot of spread across these different personas within a company. I think the area where you start to look is, who are our healthiest customers? Like, who are the most engaged and who are actually getting the most value? What can we glean and understand from the dynamics of those teams, how those deals came to fruition? And then from a bottoms up perspective, like within the user base, like actually how did the user acquisition take place and what does health look like? And then really doubling down on how do we go and do our best to repeatedly drive our most successful customers is the framework that we used in the past.
It sounds like this is going back to a little bit of what you said earlier about the role of a go-to-market organization at a PLG company, partially being to get feedback, to tie the story of the customer into not just the sales process in the future, but also into the product, right? And to get that mechanism for the product and future development that ultimately is going to drive more adoption.
Yep, I agree. It's interesting where in the last, we'll call it 5-7 years, the concept of a sales assist team is one that has gained a lot of steam. And to kind of define that in a more specific way, having folks that are engaging with your free or paid user base, but the self-serve portion of your funnel, where you want to have conversations and gain those insights. You want to help them towards a buying decision of some kind. These are typically going to be very short cycle transactional deals that don't really warrant a full quota carrying seller to be working. And in scaled organizations like a Dropbox, like those teams actually serve as the feedback mechanism for what should be productized over time. What experiments are working? What are gaps that we have in the different flows on our self-service journey that we think that we can identify with humans and then productize and become more efficient throughout the way there. The goal there is how do we, frankly, just goal people not on revenue and goal people on satisfaction and customer and NPS, call it what you will. And I think that those teams, particularly as you have larger and larger user bases, so call it a Figma, a Miro, a Dropbox at that kind of scale, that's where it becomes really interesting, where you kind of decouple the insights at scale from being a responsibility solely of the revenue team or at least your sales organization, because the volume of data points I've seen becomes an issue. And what I mean by that is if you're a leader on the product side and you're taking a look and you're working with your growth team and you've got millions of users, your data set is massive. Now you wheel in your mid-market or enterprise sales organization and they're talking about trends that they're seeing across those conversations. Those data points are going to be in the tens if you're in a really solid spot. It could even be anecdotal in the very early innings. And so that tension between it's not statistically significant, but it doesn't mean that it's not accurate in terms of the reality of what your sellers are experiencing. Figuring out that translation exercise is actually, I think, a really core role of product-led revenue leaders as well to help broker that feedback loop.